High class, during the 17th and 18th centuries, far more Africans than Europeans migrated to the Americas. Europeans grafted again onto this existing system set by the Portuguese of purchasing slaves from the African coast and using the plantation model first in the Caribbean, and then it's going to spread to the South in North America. And we've talked about that. And again, millions of slaves are being shipped to these ports from the 1440s to 1867 when it was supposed to have ended. Once these captured slaves were transported to slave ports along the African coast, it was just a horrific experience from that point in time. They were held often in these holding areas called barracoons. From there, many of them were put into ships and held captive in these holds until the ship was full. So they may be in a ship off the coast of Africa for months, literally. Many died of hunger and disease just waiting for the ship to leave. As a result of this, scholars say that most Africans who were captured in Africa died before they ever left Africa. They were held in these wretched conditions, and once the ship sailed, then they call this the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage was from Africa to either the Caribbean or the Americas, and it often proved fatal as well. Class, if you want to see what the Middle Passage is like, watch the video clip that I have in the class from the movie Amistad. Now, this slave trade profoundly altered African development and really continues to affect them to this day. Everyone in Africa that this slave trade touched, everyone in Africa, it left terrible destruction. It left a gender balance in the African mainland because more men were captured than women and children. And it also left a gender imbalance in the Americas as more men were there. Once these slaves who were captured on the mainland, and they were, we've talked about this, I think, briefly in another lecture, they were captured by elite African tribes and sold on the coast. Once they reached the Americas, their lifespan was very short. They lived harsh, oppressive, unrelenting in those kind of environments, and they didn't stand a chance in these earlier years. The triangular trade, class, is a historical term used to indicate this trade route among 3 or 4 different regions. So let me give you an example. Slaves would be purchased and sent to the Americas or the Caribbean. From there, let's say they went to a sugar plantation, so they would produce sugar. Sugar would be then sold to the colonies in New England, like Philadelphia, for example. They had a large rum-making industry there that was very important. So the rum would be created in North America and then sold back to Europe and used as a form of trading for the slaves in Africa. So it created this triangular trade. And really, class, there's a lot more that I could say about slavery, but I won't go into all of that. Take the time to read about it in the chapter. It's really one of the saddest chapters in world history with very long-term consequences. All right, let's take a look at a list of some things that I think are important, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one, but this list can guide your reading and can guide your study for the rest of this chapter. We've talked a lot about the economic integration between 1500 and 1650 in this unsettled world. Asia and Europe proper during this time, besides the Americas that we focused on, they're transforming due to this new economic flow in the New World. There's a lot of money and a lot of resources coming into Europe and Asia. These networks that we've talked about that are being fostered is really going to, again, explode the Atlantic slave trade and, again, have dire consequences for Africa. But in Eurasia, they're going to reap the benefits of these economic transactions. we're going to see that the legitimacy of the Ottoman Empire is going to be tested. We're going to see the Muloks in Egypt gain some power. We're going to see the Mughal dynasty. The Mughal Islamic Empire is going to reach a high tide. But it's going to end up leading to the downfall of the Ming dynasty, and the Qing dynasty will rise, and we'll talk more about the Qing dynasty a little bit later. So newer powers are coming into play in England and Russia and Japan, and you can read a little bit more about that. They're going to be able to use this global connection to consolidate and expand their power. But even in these new regions, the pace of change is very unsettling. It's really hard to keep up. One thing I would like to point out that I want you to place a little focus of study on is going to be what happened in France and the development of absolute monarchy. What is so important about this? Well, instead of sharing power with the aristocracy or the church, this is the ideology that the king should and would rule free from intervention, from external checks. The king should be able to rule freely with no say-so from anyone else. It sounds good for the king, right? But we're going to see that this is not going to work out well over time. It's going to lead to some rebellions, and it's going to lead to revolution as well. Now, in France, the king during this time was Louis XIV, the Sun King. And one of the things that this inflow of money and wealth is going to allow him to do is to build the Palace of Versailles. And there's a picture of it here on the side, class, for you to take a look at. This is really one of the most absolutely spectacular things that have ever been built. It's an architectural wonder, and it's still there, class. If you want to visit the Palace of Versailles, you can do so. And I have visited the Palace of Versailles, and I wanted to give you a couple of comments about the Palace of Versailles. This is one of the pictures here is the Hall of Mirrors, which is just absolutely incredible. And if you ever get a chance to go to Versailles, let me know. Send me an email. Ask me some questions. I'll be glad to give you some do's and don'ts about traveling to France and to Paris and to Versailles. As usual, class, keep in touch.